Welcome back to another thrilling episode of Killer Psychologist. I'm your host, Dr. Dana Anderson, and today we have a truly special guest. Joining us is the esteemed Dr. Michael Schirripa, a forensic psychiatrist from Australia. The brilliant mind behind his first thriller novel, Mindhunt, and the host of the popular podcast, Mindhunting. Dr. Schirripa's career has been dedicated to exploring the darkest corners of human psyche, and his insights into criminal behavior are remarkable. He was inspired by authors like Stephen King, also one of my favorite authors, Michael Crichton, and James Patterson. So Dr. Schirripa brings a unique perspective to our discussion, which today we're going to be exploring Silence of the Lambs, one of my personal favorite movies that inspired my career. And of course, we'll be discussing the infamous character Hannibal Lecter, inspired by real-life figures like Dr. Alfredo Ballí Treviño, Ted Bundy, and Ed Gein. Hannibal combines intelligence, charm, and a disturbing fascination with human anatomy, making him a fascinating subject for analysis. So, Dr. Schirripa, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And what I really want to know is if Hannibal Lecter invited you over for dinner, what would be your strategy to avoid becoming the main course?
Well, Dana and Craig, can I say, first of all, what a great question. And thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm such a fan of your podcast. It's intriguing to listen into you guys and the guests you have. Well, I think I would want to make myself as least palatable as humanly possible. So I think the strategy, I would have to ingest some sort of medication or some sort of toxin that wouldn't kill me, but would probably make me taste awful. And, it may lead to some sort of toxic or allergic reaction in Dr. Lecter. I think that would possibly be one of the only ways that I could avoid being served as an entree or maybe a main course in his dinner plans, but I think it would be very, very difficult to avoid that. But I wondered, though, if there was a way of appealing to his sense of narcissism, perhaps, and sort of get him distracted and maybe just start talking about, who else might we? Maybe we could work together to eat someone. That way we could at least formulate a bit of a plan to get out of there and buy some time. But I would worry, though, that like a lot of his victims, I would just be so seduced by listening to everything that he had to say that I would soon forget that I was in the company of a serial killer cannibal and just end up as one of his many victims. So I'm not sure that when it came down to it, I would be any better off than anyone else in avoiding his evil clutches.
I know what I would do
hilarious.
if I went to dinner.
Oh, what would you do, Craig?
Well, the gun laws are a little different in Australia than they are in the United States. But I would be coming strapped, as we call it in the United States.
Well, that too. I think that would be a much more straightforward solution, and I think that's an interesting point because it's, but that's it, as you probably know, that's not really something that is that embedded in the Australian psyche, as you say. The gun laws here are quite different and quite, that sort of filters through, I think, a lot of it. But I think you're right, Craig. I think that would be a much better solution and a much better way of being avoiding being eaten.
Not that I'm advocating violence per se, but in the event he comes at me with a scalpel of sorts or some other weapon,
you would be better off with a firearm. I agree.
So what if Hannibal Lecter asked you to help him create a dating profile? What would his selling points be?
Well, I think, first and foremost, his intelligence and his his broad education, not just in medicine and not just in psychiatry, but really Hannibal, and I think this is one of the points that comes out more in the book or the series of books than in the films. He really is a polymath. He is absolutely across so many areas of knowledge, history, literature. So I think that would be one of his huge selling points, his IQ, his articulate nature, his ability to hold a conversation in any context, and his real interest in people, which obviously extends to the culinary, but still he is a psychiatrist, and he does have the ability to understand people and can listen to people. He did have quite a successful practice, even though it sort of turned bad in the end. So I think that would be a selling point. His level of sophistication and his level of intelligence. But of course, he does have great taste in in many ways. So he's someone who has this very refined outlook on life, I'd say. He's into the arts. He's into the sort of the classical music and the theatre and antiques and all of those things. So in many ways, Hannibal would make quite a nice date for someone, I think, depending on how that ended up. It would start off well, I think. I think while they're exchanging messages on the dating app initially, it would all seem just, fantastic. So I think those sorts of elements he should play up in his dating profile. He'd probably want to keep his particular culinary taste to one side, at least until the second date. But as an initial profile, I think he should really, use the power of language to, articulate his sense of self. I think that would be very appealing to a lot of potential dates out there.
And perhaps he could host a book club at his house. And I wonder what kind of snacks he would serve.
Well, if you remember, there's a fantastic scene in Red Dragon, which is kind of like the sort of the prequel in a way to Silence of the Lambs, where Hannibal is portrayed as this. He's very philanthropic. He's very involved in the arts community in Baltimore, and is a huge supporter of the local symphony orchestra. And there's this very famous, if you've seen it or remember it, there's a very famous scene where he hosts a dinner party for all of the executive or the board members of the orchestra. And again, this is the brilliance of it. The audience is sucked into seeing this as this wonderfully sophisticated dinner party. He's the perfect host, making jokes, quips, filling up everyone's wine glasses, serving this incredible 5-course dinner that he's cooked. But little do we know, of course, it is revealed that because he's unhappy with the lead violinist playing, that he gets served as part of the dinner. But what's really fascinating as well with that is that we see some of the other members of the committee or the board joking about how this violinist has gone missing. They don't know that they're being served him, but they know he's gone missing. And a few of them are sort of joking, well, it's really no great loss to the orchestra that he's gone missing. And this is one of the great things, I think, that comes through all of the Thomas Harris novels and the films about Lecter. This idea of where do we draw the line between, psychopaths and the rest of us? We like to see a very distinct, clear line between us and them, I think. We are normal and healthy, and we would never do anything like Hannibal Lecter. they're over there, we're over here. But I think sometimes that dividing line is very grey and very blurred. And I think that's one of the things that comes through in the books and the films is just, how much we all as humans have the potential at times to think and behave in psychopathic ways without kind of realising it. And so I think that, Hannibal is the perfect illustration of that because he's so cultured and so intelligent, as we were saying, on the one hand, and yet here he is, this absolute monster that we kind of don't want to see in many ways because we identify, I think, so much with so many of his positive characteristics that we would love to see ourselves in that role. But then it's like, oh, no, we've gone too far now. We've been drawn into this psychopathic world. That's not really me. And we repel. So it's that tense dynamic that I think works so well in these ways.
Yeah, the dark elements of the human psyche sort of emerge, where like you point out, and there's another book called Almost a Psychopath. I don't know if you've read that, but it speaks to that sort of that nuanced gray area that we see in people who probably wouldn't meet the classification criteria for psychopathy per se, but they've got these dark elements about them, right? Where they have the potential, but there's this sort of moral compass or something that's keeping them from, say, crossing over maybe into the line where, you're committing a criminal act, as an example, and you end up getting in trouble for that.
Yeah, I think that is such a fantastic point, Craig. And it's really, I think that really underscores this movement, particularly in contemporary psychiatry now, in terms of diagnosis, where and same in psychology, I think too, where we're moving away from these black and white categorical diagnoses into that more dimensional realm now, exactly as you were saying, Craig, where things really exist on a spectrum across all things. It's no longer the case, I think, where we say, well, you either have it or you don't have it. I think we need to look at some of those individual components that are there. And yes, even though someone may not meet the full diagnostic criteria in the DSM or, they still exhibit psychopathic traits or tendencies or borderline tendencies or narcissistic that again, we all have to some degree, and depending on circumstance, of course, and our own layers of defense mechanisms, just how that all plays out. So I think that is a really, fascinating part of the contemporary mental health world, but also very hard to grapple with because I think it narrows that margin, I think, between the us and them debate, which has been used for so many years. But I see that as a positive because I think ultimately, if we can all get comfortable with that, I think that's going to help to reduce stigma, help people to come forward, and and I think moving us away from some of these diagnostic labels is helpful. So I think there are a lot of those grey zones that are sort of growing larger as time goes on.
Yeah, those are such great points. And again, I can speak also to some of the contemporary neuroscience that's looking at, psychopathy, right? From that neuroscience perspective. And we're now finding that, there's elements of psychopathy that actually might be helpful. There's folks, they have a psychopathic brain. The neuroimaging suggests that, these circuits in the limbic system and the anterior cingulate cortex, these areas of the brain we know have sort of a dysregulation, or they don't function the same as say, healthy or non-psychopathic.
Yeah.
But yet these people still, they're successful in their careers, in their, social functioning. And so, it's interesting how that there is a nuance here that I think we're starting to recognize that. And I agree with you. It's, Dana and I do a lot of diagnostic work. We do a lot of personality assessment, and we're assessing for psychopathology or elements of that, when we're doing court ordered evaluations. And and I teach adult psychopathology at the university. And
Yeah.
so one of the things I try to stress too is what you point out, which is that even though we still have this reductionistic approach to classifying personality disorders, as, okay, these criteria need to be met, and then
Yes.
you meet right. And so, no, it really we need to look at this more dimensionally, like you say. It's really important.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, Craig, what you were saying about some of the adaptive components of psychopathy. And, I'm interested in sort of evolutionary sort of psychiatry as well. And it's interesting to read, given that, with an illness like schizophrenia, for example, there's this sort of global incidence of around 1%, throughout the whole world, really. And it's like, well, evolutionary, well, why, from that perspective, why would an illness like that we would say, well, that can cause such devastation, why would that have survived? Why has it, clearly been part of the human evolutionary process? And then it's fascinating to read anthropological and evolutionary theories about, well, back when we had tribal groups, we needed the paranoid person who would be up all night looking for danger so the rest of us could sleep and the rest of us could function the next day. And
Right.
and also, I think as well, the sometimes the person in the group who had psychosis would lead the group into new and uncharted territories, probably based on maybe a hallucination or something, but ultimately to the benefit of the group, because they would discover a new terrain or a new food source or something that they had not thought of themselves before. So there was that, almost like that creativity, and that for the one person in the group that was so important and made them actually a valued member of the group or the tribe thousands of years ago, that led them to. So it's fascinating, again, that paradox almost between illnesses or personality types that we've seen as being just so maladaptive, but also can have those incredibly adaptive components to them that we really need to understand, and as a potential for benefiting society perhaps, or benefiting other people maybe. So it's those paradoxes are just endlessly fascinating, I think.
Yeah, we see the same thing with the base rates for psychopathy, and again, that's estimated because most of the psychopaths, we actually don't know who they are.
Yes.
They're out there in the community. They're out there amongst us, but it's around 1%. Kind of like schizophrenia,
Remarkable.
right?
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite quotes in the movie Silence of the Lambs? They could come from Hannibal Lecter that are your favorite things that he says in the movie.
Well, there are so many. The screenwriting is just so, and obviously Anthony Hopkins' deliverance of these lines was just sort of, second to none. It was like the role was, specifically created for him. There is one line when when he first meets, or one of the early scenes with Clarice Starling, where she's trying to get the information out of him about, Buffalo Bill, the serial killer. And he talks about an ex-patient of his who had bipolar disorder, who was a victim, but a potential victim of, not of Hannibal, but of another patient of his. And, he gives this very sort of glib, dry line to her. He said, well, yes, he was a garden variety manic depressive, but it was the best thing for him, really. His therapy was going nowhere. And, just those sorts of lines that he would just deliver, which you do have a bit of a guilty laugh at, when people deliver that. But I think that some of the most sort of, the interactions between Hopkins and Jodie Foster, in this film are just sort of stunning. And I think I said this in my podcast episode on it. She was so terrified of him on the set that she would avoid speaking to him between scenes, and because he was just so much in character and so sort of convincing. But I think that there's certain lines where the quid pro quo sequence that he has with her is amazing, where that's sort of something for something, I'll tell you something but you tell me something, and the way that he sort of seduces her really into giving up so much of herself, because he cottons on so quickly to her ambition, and the way that he sort of mocks her accent, you're pure West Virginia, that sort of thing. And, you're nothing but a generation away from white trash and all that, just these absolute darts that he delivers upon, that are all just so spot on that that you really feel that in the audience, I think, and that she just has to almost sort of surrender to that because she's got nowhere to hide. But in terms of other lines, I think when he is, he tells her as well things like, if you want to understand someone, if you want to understand a thing, you need to get right in and look at their very nature. He says, read Marcus Aurelius, and lines like that. But those lines are so powerful, of course, because of the great irony, of course, in what he is, he's saying, that he will not examine himself in that way, but he expects her and everyone else to sort of examine others in that way. But he doesn't point that towards himself. So I think some of the lines like that are so amazing. And there, of course, is that incredible scene in Silence of the Lambs, which was a line from the book as well, where he meets the senator on the tarmac of the airport, the senator whose daughter has been abducted. And she tries to meet with him to cut a deal for information. They wheel him out. He's got the mask on and he's in the straitjacket, and they're, this far away from each other. And whilst they're cutting this deal, he turns to her and says, "Oh, so did you breastfeed her?" And just, these absolute, daggers that he can just throw when no one's expecting it. And, and she just, recoils in horror. And then he makes comments about the breastfeeding to her, how he can just hone in on someone's absolute vulnerabilities in the moment and exploit it purely and utterly for his own pleasure and for no other reason. I think that I think as well also comes out so much more in the novel too, because there's more of a description in there about how he just has this incredible sense of pleasure being able to deliver a horrifying line like that to someone. And it just underscores that psychopathic tendency just so perfectly that's what it's all about. So I think some of those lines, really sort of stand out for me. His articulate use of language in order to really convey that sense of psychopathy. I know it's probably a bit disturbed from my point of view, but it's just done so perfectly that it's hard to recapture that in any other way, I think. Mm.
Have you had a patient like Hannibal Lecter?
Well, I don't think I've ever had a cannibal, not to my knowledge anyway. But I have seen, I've certainly seen highly, psychopathic prisoners, for example, serial killers, who didn't have the difference is they just didn't have the intelligence of Hannibal Lecter. I think that's one of the big things but that internal psychopathic dynamic, just just absolutely, and that complete and utter lack of remorse and just devoid of any sort of empathy. We had quite a famous case here in South Australia that goes back probably about 25 years now, where there were a group of men, there were 3 men in particular, who committed a range of serial killings around Adelaide. I think in the end they killed around a dozen people, all purely really for psychopathic reasons. There was some financial motivation to do it, but generally it was just something that they decided needed to happen. And so I saw one of these, one of the convicted killers in my jail clinic, and it's that experience of, it's so hard to describe, but it's looking into someone's eyes and just there's nothing there. There's just like a blankness that's behind there, that really glib, bland, just lack of emotion. And this particular guy, who was never going to be released from prison, he came into my clinic one day, I remember, and sat down and said, "Oh, Doc, it's good to see you." And I said, "Oh, why is that?" He said, "Oh, I'm incredibly excited." And I said, "Oh, why is that?" He said, "Oh, well, I'm getting married." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's intriguing." And he went on and told me that he, as certain women do, that he had attracted pen pals in prison, and he and this particular woman had decided to sort of get married, which was obviously completely sort of unrealistic. But it was just that complete lack of emotion and any sort of sense of warmth that was just completely sort of devoid, which is quite chilling to be in the company of someone who is like that. But yeah, certainly I don't think I've seen anyone with that combination of psychopathy and Hannibal Lecter's intelligence. I think that that is something that is very rare indeed. Even though I'm sure it's out there, it's rare to find that. But certainly, though, those who really try to manipulate you, of course, as as a doctor, for example, either in prison clinics or as in outpatient clinics as well, attempting that kind of seductive charm in a way to try to just get you on side with them, and come on, Doc, you would understand this, and surely you could see this. There's often those sorts of attempts made, which often don't sort of go very far, but again, it gives you, I think, that real insight into that desire to just manipulate others and have control over other people and power over other people that often comes through in quite a frightening manner at times. But it's so important, isn't it, to be consciously aware of that as it's happening to you as well, so you don't get too drawn into it and end up being served on Hannibal's menu.
Well, I want to make a point about this. Really, a good point you bring up about the especially in these custodial environments. So I've worked in prisons, I've worked in acute forensic psychiatric facilities, and one of the things I think that is important for anybody who's going to go into forensic psychiatry, psychology, even nursing, any of these roles where you're providing healthcare services or assessment, is you have to really, really understand this level of manipulation that some of these folks and you're right. Like, yes, generally psychopaths have above average IQ on average. They tend to have a little higher than average, but it doesn't mean they're a genius level, right?
Yes.
Like Hannibal, Hannibal's at Einstein level, right? Einstein level of IQ, which would be above 150 or above. Yeah. But I saw so many support staff, healthcare staff, get reeled into that manipulation, and and we had, we had doctors get into relationships with inmates and end up getting married to them. Of course, they got fired, they lost their job.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a really fascinating point you bring up.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah, that's a good point, Craig. I've seen that as well, where the boundary violations between clinical staff and patients and prisoners is just, it just crumbles away sometimes before they know it, and then they're trapped in this. Well, in this horrible world at times where they can't get out of. And I was amazed at times working, like you said, in forensic psychiatric facilities where where nursing staff had developed relationships with patients there that continued on, outside of the outside of the facility once these people were eventually sort of released. So yes, it's something that we all have to be conscious of, and I think that's where the very important role of supervision with a objective, experienced colleague just makes such a world of difference as well, to just sit down and run some of these things by them, because there's that sense when you're working in prisons or working in the forensic psychiatric facility, you yourself can become institutionalized as well, I think, and very much, I think, start to think in those sorts of ways. And before long, I think it starts to, it does start to affect the way you can sometimes sort of see the world or see yourself or see other people. And of course, in forensic facilities, this is one of the things that attracted me to forensic psychiatry, is we could actually keep the patients for a lot longer and actually really try to help them at the end of the day because we had time. But that also means you're spending a lot of time with these patients as well. You are spending a huge amount of time day in, day out with this particular cohort of patients, mentally ill offenders and psychopathic personalities. So I think it's important to be able to step back like that outside of those walls of the prison or the psychiatric facility and have some supervision or advice, outside of that to balance it up sometimes before it becomes too overwhelming, I guess.
Yeah, real quick. One of the strategies I've adopted. I'm just going to make this point real fast. It's an interesting strategy. It's working for me. I don't know if other professionals or people who are looking to go into the field may do the same. But I actually take breaks. So between working in these facilities, so I'll go in. I'll do a year. Do a year. And then I'll just take. So I'm on a break right now from one of the forensic facilities that I practice in. But I'll eventually go back, and I find that does help kind of recalibrate, just my orientation in terms of how I approach working with these patients. Go ahead, Dana. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
People will say we're in love. That's one of Hannibal's lines.
Of course, that is a wonderful. That is, that, and again, a very multi-layered comment, really. I mean, yes, on the surface it's this sarcastic line, and but there is this sort of developing kind of infatuation between the two of them, in many ways. There's the this sort of fact from both of them. I think there's she is the one character that even though he could have the opportunity to kill her or to eat, he doesn't do that. There's a certain he wants to help her in one way, really, I think, which is I think something of a new experience for him as much as it is for her as well. So, and there's that scene in not in Silence of the Lambs, but in Hannibal, the follow-up movie, which unfortunately had, but it had a different, had Julianne Moore as Clarice Starling, where they're handcuffed together. And I don't know if you remember this as to what, and he gets a meat cleaver and there's no way of getting the handcuffs off. And as he pulls up the meat cleaver, he just says, "This is really going to hurt." But of course, the thing is, he cuts his own hand off, not hers, even though he had the opportunity to cut her, and we all think that's what he's going to do. So there are some great one-liners in there like that. That's for sure. And of course, at the end of, I think it's the end of Silence of the Lambs, when Hannibal's got away, he organises to meet the equally sort of narcissistic and somewhat psychopathic Dr. Chilton, of course, the psychiatric supervisor of the facility. And he says, "Clarice, I have to go. I'm meeting an old friend for dinner." So that's a fantastic line as well.
And let's talk about Buffalo Bill. What psychological explanation could you give for Buffalo Bill's unique dance moves? Is there a clinical term for that?
Well, I'm not sure how you would, this sort of transitional sort of dyskinesia, sort of almost in a way, but
so if that's all you could go off of is just watching his dance moves and like looking into his house, like his interior decorating, kind of like, what is going on here?
Yeah, you'd be like, "I'm moving from this neighborhood right now. I don't need any more information. I'm out of here." Just
like, what kind of skincare advice do you think Buffalo Bill would be giving?
Well, that's another great line from the, how he, it rubs the lotion on its skin, and speaking about her in the third person, like that is that's such a memorable, another sort of with the yapping poodle as well, and then just all of those elements just combine so incredibly, just remarkable. I think it was Jonathan Demme was the director, who just did such an amazing job of the aesthetic of the film and the way that it was shot, as well. But that whole idea of Buffalo Bill, making this second skin for himself from his victims, that is just sort of so dark, of course, but it's just so fascinating as well. And of course that also, throughout the plot plays into the interplay between Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter. This idea of change and transition, as we see Clarice transitioning, at one level from the FBI graduate into a fully fledged agent, but also more broadly kind of transitioning in her own skin out from her own background, her own traumatic past, in a way, her own losses, into this new version of herself, in a way, where, she wants to be this, sophisticated, well-read, articulate, brilliant FBI agent. And in many ways, he wants to leave her sort of past behind. So there's that sort of transitional period for her, as well, that kind of almost sort of parallels as she attempts to grow her own skin. And Hannibal makes comments, he can smell her perfume, he can, you use Evian skin cream, and but not today, when you come to see me, all of those sorts of lines. So there's always going back again, reviewing the film again with those particular themes in mind. There's so much there that comes out about even just that theme of transitioning and developing from one person and your identity. How much can we actually change our core identity? Can we change it or not? Or are we always going to have those strong elements of the past, as a part of that? I mean, so again, it's just so fascinating how all of those elements combine and tie together. Ooh, I think
you're silenced.
Yes.
you're silenced.
There we go.
There we go.
So Buffalo Bill's dating profile may be starkly different than Hannibal Lecter's.
Yes. Well, dog lovers, that's a big... Certainly if you had a nice photo with the poodle, that would help, I think. Well, certainly, he could talk about skincare, perhaps, and different lotions and things that he could rub in you, this sort of thing. But I think I think he would have a harder time initially, getting some of those people to swipe right on his profile compared to Hannibal Lecter. But I think that he has that. They picked up on that. I think it was Ted Bundy who would feign an injury, like a broken arm or a show, in order to get women to help him, like get stuff into his van and all of that. So I think that. And of course, we see Buffalo Bill, doing that in the Silence of the Lambs film as well. So he would have to really, I think, maybe sort of play up a bit of his vulnerabilities and sort of wanting to be cared for in that way. I think it's a hard stretch though for him to find too much more he could put in his dating app profile. I think because
will travel.
Yeah, have. That's right. Have the serial killer van with the blacked out windows. That always fills people with confidence. And I think once people see that deep well that he's got in his house, that's probably probably going to be a red flag, I would have thought as well. But despite the cute dog.
How has Silence of the Lambs influenced the public perception of forensic psychology and criminal profiling? And I'll just say, obviously, I'm a fan of Silence of the Lambs, and it influenced me to get into this career. And what's your thoughts on how it's people that have watched the movie, how it's changed the perception of the public about forensic psychology?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it. Well, I think it has. I think it has had a big impact. I think the first thing I'd say is, Hannibal Lecter being a psychiatrist, first of all, and a forensic he is actually a forensic psychiatrist. Sort of did the industry probably no favors in that sense, as probably portrayed us all as these sort of, not necessarily as cannibals, but I think as people who really like to just get inside people's minds for the purpose of playing around in there and manipulating and all of that sort of thing. So I think that that comes through. But I think obviously Hannibal displays these sort of remarkable sort of profiling insights into the serial killers that of course are very difficult and not really that scientific in terms of like actual profiling as such from that point of view. And I think I think that is something that people take away. Oh, forensic psychologist, forensic psychiatrist, what you do is just sort of profile serial killers, and you deliver this, incredible profile to the FBI or whoever, law enforcement, and then based on that, they know exactly who to. And you can do that because you can sort of read minds and sort of, that they don't see all the other, all the elements of being, which is actually about providing, scientifically based psychological and psychiatric assessments and opinions to the courts, for example, about people's competence to stand trial, or whether people have a mental impairment defence available to them or not. And then, of course, there's the treatment side as well, treating, the importance of actually providing solid evidence-based treatment for mentally ill offenders as well. So I think the Silence of the Lambs franchise really skews everything so much towards this sort of, forensic psychologists, forensic psychiatrists. They've just got these sort of magical, mystical, telepathic powers that can allow them to hunt down serial killers. So I think people can have that, and people have, like you guys, no doubt, out there in the world, you meet people. Oh, what do? You talk a bit about it. Oh, so do you profile? So do you do? Do you do this? Do you? What am I thinking right now? This.
Yeah.
This sort of this sort of thing. So I think it has certainly from that point of view, sort of skewed things towards that pole, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. There really is a misunderstanding out there, like you point out. We have students coming into our doctoral program I teach in, and even they have this misunderstanding and about like what a forensic psychologist actually does. Like they just think it's all about the profiling.
Yes.
And what's interesting, and again, in Australia, I don't know if you have the equivalent of, I assume you have like an FBI equivalent.
Yes.
I probably should know that,
the Australian Federal Police, same thing.
Okay. Yeah. So and maybe, and you know this, I'm sure, but when the behavioral analysis unit was started back in, I believe, in the 1970s, it was a couple of FBI agents that actually began to look at these retrospective data to put together these profiling. I don't want to call it an algorithm because that's not initially what it was, but it's kind of what it is now. Right. So they and that wasn't; those weren't even psychologists that initially started that. Initial. What's interesting is speaking of the profiling, I'm wondering about, and I wonder what your take is on this. How is artificial intelligence going to inform this practice of profile? In other words, do you think we could become more precise, be more precise at identifying who might be, say, the killer when we got a series going on? That's I'm curious about that, because I think there's there's a space and opportunity to explore that further.
I think absolutely there is. I think that I do think we're a long way off AI being able to get inside the human mind. But what I do think that AI will evolve to in that context is be able to piece together a person's life based on a whole range of metadata about a person that could, for example, be able to pinpoint, say, a person's movements or locations, or if you get what I mean. So I think, for example, AI could very much, in the absence of other evidence, could say, oh, well, I know Michael Schirripa, it's with a 99.9% probability at 4:37 p.m. on Friday afternoon, he was here, and then he was there, and then he purchased this, and then that was used here, and that was used there, and then if you're investigating, say, a homicide or something, like that sort of thing. I don't think it'll be able to get inside the mind as such, But in terms of all of those other elements of putting pieces together, I think it'll be very, very, effective at that. And, and building a profile around movements, locations, behaviors, I guess is what I'm saying. I think it'll be good at behaviors, not so much at motivations or the emotional state of a person, but certainly behavioral profiles. I think that's something that it could probably exceed the human ability to do that. But again, I don't think we're there. We're not there yet, obviously. But I think that's something that is evolving.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I was just looking at this last night with the future of, say, the generative AI models and these is what they call the large language models. And in the future, I think you're right. But not now, but in the future. And again, I don't know when that might be. It could be 2 years, 5 years. Yes. But I think there's a possibility that these AI LLMs might actually be able to engage in this sort of reasoned, analysis that really would be far more powerful than what the human brain possibly could do. So I'm curious about that down the road. It'd just be fascinating to see how that could be applied.
It is. I'm not sure what the state of play is like in the United States at the moment, but here there is a very vigorous debate going on about our future energy needs and where that should come from. There's a huge debate at the moment about whether we should be looking at a nuclear option in this country, which we don't have at the moment, but or we should be harnessing. But one of the tie-ins for that is listening to people like Bill Gates even, and people saying that what we don't appreciate is the growth of AI, the energy demands that AI is going to require if it's going to proceed. We're not able to sort of comprehend those yet. Like there's going to be, which I hadn't thought of. I thought, well, that's very interesting because so just the energy required to run advancing AI software and advancing AI algorithms is going to just be so immense that at the moment we don't actually have an energy solution to that, let alone feeding ourselves, keeping ourselves warm, keeping, those sorts of things. So that's very interesting because I wonder, is that actually going to be actually a limiter for the growth of AI? It's not so much the technology, but the energy to run that technology. We may not actually have that. So that may slow things down a little bit in terms of this rapid progression, because I feel like a lot of people, I feel sort of somewhat anxious about AI and where it's going to go and how far it's going to, extend.
Some risks.
The risks, absolutely. So, but that's an interesting sort of debate that's being had here at the moment, that we need to have energy to live first, then maybe we can look at the AI. So it's just an interesting sort of segue there, I guess, from that point of view.
Okay, Dr. Schirripa, I reached out to people on social media with questions for you. So I have one last question.
Oh, yes.
They wanted to know your most memorable career moment or memorable client that you wanted to share.
Oh, well, there's one event that comes to mind very clearly. When this is sort of almost 20 years ago now. So when I was doing my residency, I guess, I'd gone through general psychiatry. I was doing my subspecialty training in forensic psychiatry, and I was posted to a forensic community team. So we had probably much like so we have a specific forensic mental health service here that will look after those who are in the community with who are under orders, having been found not guilty by mental impairment, that sort of thing. So here I am. I was this very junior, sort of relatively junior part of the team, with all these experienced people, and we had this particular patient in the service who some years before had taken a police officer hostage. He had schizophrenia. He was psychotic, very paranoid, hallucinating. He managed to take a police officer hostage, got the police officer's gun out of his holster and put it to his head and pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed and didn't fire. And that allowed other officers to. So it was only through the grace of God or whatever, that this person survived. So this person was he was very non-compliant with medication, used drugs, so he needed a lot of input. So the word came in that this guy who was out there living in the community had become unwell, was not taking his medication, was starting to talk about delusional ideas again and all of that. So we had to go out as a community team with the view that this guy probably needed to be back in hospital because he was still under forensic mental health orders, which meant that we could actually go out if he was unwell and bring him straight back into a forensic psychiatric unit for inpatient treatment if needed. So we all went out to, we went out to see him, and we drove into this guy's street. And I could see all of these black SUVs everywhere parked on the street. And then there were the SWAT team van was there parked in the street, and all these armed sort of in their black outfits from the, you have similar, I think, in the U, we're all there. And I was like, oh, is this for us? And they're like, well, yeah, because of what he did to that police officer, we flagged it with them that we were coming out. And so so they're all there. So I was like, oh, okay, in this little suburban street. So I get out of the car, and this woman comes up to me and starts strapping me up with a bulletproof vest because I have to go and knock on this guy's door and say, oh, hi, I'm your local forensic psychiatrist, just thought I'd stop by for a chat and see how you're getting on. And she's strapping this on, and she was dressed in just like civilian clothes, and I was a bit puzzled by this. And I said to her, oh, I'm Michael, nice, who are you? She said, I'm Michelle, and I said, oh, and what are you? What's your role here? And she said, oh, I'm the hostage negotiator. And I said, you're the hostage negotiator? And I looked around and I said, well, who are you here for? And she said, well, potentially for you. So I was, at that point I thought, oh, this is not going to be a typical work day. But she said, don't worry, as you can see, we've got snipers up on all the roofs of all that. And I thought, oh my God, you do too. So I went and sort of, with my flat jacket on, went and knocked on. And in fact, he answered the door. He answered his door with a bucket of fried chicken, and in his underwear, and was sort of quite sort of just perplexed by it all, really, and didn't. But he was actually. He was actually psychotic, and we did manage to get him back into hospital. But the biggest threat, though, came from he had a much younger partner who was pregnant at the time that we actually weren't aware was in the house as well. And, she was absolutely furious with me. She was a lot more, you can't, because we were taking him away and taking him to hospital, she was absolutely livid and started throwing cushions at me and, swearing and telling me. So at that point I thought, I'm probably more at risk from her right now, I think, than him. But at the end of the day, all kind of worked out. He was very unwell, so it was a satisfying outcome at the end of the day because we got him into hospital without any other problems, and he got some further comprehensive treatment. But it was I'll never forget that day when she said, "Yep, I'm the hostage negotiator, and I'm probably going to be here for you." And I thought, okay, well. And I haven't had that again, but that really stands out as a work memory or a patient memory.
Well, thank God he had some fried chicken before he came to the door.
That was quite helpful, actually. I think that was. I'd much rather he had that in his hands than anything else.
That's like a terrible commercial for fried chicken.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. You wouldn't. I don't think they could put that up on billboards or anything like that for KFC or anything.
It wasn't Kentucky Fried Chicken, was it? Or
I think it might have been. I think it was. Yeah.
I feel like that scene could maybe go in your next book or something.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I'm sure yeah. I am reading this. I took it poolside the other day, and I'm drawn into it. So I'm so excited to have a novel to read now. And
Dana froze for a second.
Yeah.
Hopefully it comes back.
Yeah,
sometime
it should
soon.
Oh, there we
There
go.
you are.
So
You're
you just
unfrozen
froze
now.
for a second there, Dana. You said you were poolside.
Poolside with this. People probably thinking I'm a psychopath. But that's fine. I actually took it into the sauna too.
Oh wow!
So I'm delighted to have a book to read, and it's so captivating. I'm so excited.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's not only educational, so you're learning something new, but it's a mystery, and you're diving into the characters. And I'm just such a fan. So,
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for hanging out with us.
It's been wonderful.
And
the time has gone so quickly. I've had a great time talking about Hannibal. I now want to go watch the films all over again.
That's what I said. I've got all of three of. I think there's three, right, in the trilogy.
There's four of them. Four all up. Because,
so
they did a
Hannibal's
later one, which is called Hannibal Rising, which tells his early life and some of the trauma that he went through in Lithuania during the war. But there's three main ones with Anthony Hopkins. Yeah.
It's fascinating. I'm so glad it made my day to talk about this because
likewise.
I love Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
And so we'll have to do this again sometime, and you
I
can
would
pick
love that.
You can pick whatever you want to talk about.
Okay. Well, we'll find another fascinating forensic topic that crosses into pop culture, and we'll get together again. But thank you so much, both of you. It's been wonderful chatting with you. It's been amazing. So I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. Yeah.
And lastly, tell people where they can find you and your book. Mindhunt.
So you can find me. I've got a website, so michaelschirripa.com. I'm also on Instagram, where I have updates on various other things, and I talk a little bit of forensic psychiatry on there. And my book is currently available on Amazon everywhere as the hard copy, as Dana has, but also as the ebook for your Kindle. And I'll soon be recording an audiobook version as well. So we'll get that out there also. So, but I'm so glad you're enjoying the book. I just really wanted to combine those elements of the realities of forensic psychiatry, but wrapped up in a mystery and a thriller as well, so that people were sort of given, because a lot of books, as we guys would know, there's some great forensic psychology and psychiatry novels and thrillers out there, but mostly they're not written by psychologists or psychiatrists. So a lot of the information, even though it's entertaining, is just not accurate. Yeah. So I wanted to try to combine the accuracy with a bit of a thriller component. So hopefully that works. And I'm working on the follow-up book at the moment. So 2025 should see number 2 out there. So we'll see how we go.
Nice.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our time today.
Likewise. It's been wonderful. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening. For episode details and merch, check out killerpsychologistpodcast.com. And for forensic services, you can book online at psychologydr.com. That's psychologydoctor.com.